First of all, the British came as a company to trade. They were a commercial venture. They had a charter from the royal court in Britain, and they came here to trade. And in fact, don't forget that the East India Company was established in 1600, and India had been trading with the world, particularly in fine textiles, cottons, linens, muslins, and so on, for literally more than 2,000 years before that. India was the world's leading exporter of fine cloth. Silks too in some places, though China was more famous for silks, but we also had Indian silks. And muslin, linen was so famous, it was said that Indian muslins were light as woven air. And there's a famous story of how you could pull a gauze through a ring. So these guys came to buy all that, and of course the traditional desire for Indian spices, particularly to preserve things before the invention of refrigeration. And so spices, particularly from the south, cloth from the rest of India, and of course they needed to get it out through ports because everything was sea trade in those days. So the East India Company comes, they try and establish a presence on the coasts, Surat first, Masulipatam in the south, north towards what we now know as Kolkata. And what do? They start trading, which means that they have to bring money from England. They don't have too much of it. Purchase goods in India, which they then took back to England and sold for 4 or 5 times the price they'd paid. That's how they made money, and that's how the company had begun to prosper. Through most of the 17th century, that's all the East India Company was, and if that was all the story was, we wouldn't have minded. But 2 things happened in parallel. First, they became richer. And by the way, though there were only 35 people at headquarters, they had their tentacles right across the British establishment. Something like 16% of British MPs in one particular year that I checked the figure were all shareholders in the East India Company, and I'm sure the figure was higher at different periods of the company's history. So by about 1700, and this is a time when India, by the way, accounted for 27% of global GDP, China was 23%, and Britain was 1.8%. In fact,